Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to welcome you to our Autism Awareness Book Club. Just as a reminder, we're reading the book Uniquely Human. If today is your first day tuning in, you didn't miss much. Episode 1, 2, and 3 for the Autism Awareness Book Club. We just got through the introduction. So each time before we start in our book that we're reading together, Uniquely Human, I'm always going to have just something a little extra prepared for you. So in the book by Mr. Rogers, if you don't know who he is, you should look him up. The World According to Mr. Rogers, I chose something about time and choices. You rarely have time for everything you want in this life. So you need to make choices. And hopefully your choices can come from a deep sense of who you are. So again, extra credit on this channel is everything regarding Autism Awareness Book Club. Episodes 1, 2, and 3, we covered the introduction of Uniquely Human, and I want to encourage you to tune in tomorrow because we do have a very special guest for someone who's going to read for us tomorrow. So make sure to tune in. It's going to be super special. So we are in part 1, Understanding Autism. Chapter 1, Ask Why. The first thing I noticed about Jesse was a fear and anxiety in his eyes. I was visiting a small New England school district when I heard about an 8-year-old boy who had recently transferred from a nearby district. There he had earned a dubious distinction. Administrators called Jesse the worst behavior problem they had ever encountered. It wasn't difficult to understand why. Given his challenges, Jesse, a sturdy boy with straight brown hair and wire-trimmed glasses, struggled with severe social anxiety, extreme sensitivity to touch, and difficulty processing language. He also had a seizure disorder that was detected when he was a toddler, about the time he lost the ability to speak. He communicated with little more than gestural sounds and grunts, pushing away people and objects or physically leading people to what he wanted. Since it was so difficult for Jesse to make his own needs known, he often seemed aggravated and miserable. He sometimes took out his frustration and anxiety. Sorry, I'm very tired. His frustration and anxiety on himself, pounding his fists against his thighs or his forehead, covering his body with bruises. When teachers tried to direct him from one activity to the next, he often reacted with flailing arms or by pushing them away with his arms or legs. Reports from the previous school described kicking, scratching, and biting episodes escalating into fits so severe that almost daily 3 or 4 adults had to pin the boy down and subdue him, then isolate him in a timeout room. The staff had interpreted all of this as willful, uncooperative behavior. But Jesse's mother knew better. Mothers always do. Jesse understood that his actions were his way of communicating, a direct reflection of his confusion, agitation, and fear. When she explained to the administrators that her son struggled with sensory challenges that made him unusually sensitive to loud noises and being touched, they had been dismissive. Clearly, they insisted, the boy was displaying non-compliant behavior. In their eyes, Jesse was strong-willed, stubborn, and defiant, and their response was to break him, to treat him as a trainer would treat a horse. What did these educators offer to help Jesse learn to communicate? Practically nothing. The district's policy was to focus first on controlling the child's behavior and only after achieving success to address the area of communication. They had it all wrong. I had heard so many awful things about Jesse that I was intrigued to come face to face with him. When I finally did, I didn't observe any of what I had heard described. Not the defiance, not the aggression, not the willful disobedience. What I saw was a boy who was understandably frightened, anxious, and constantly on guard. And I saw something else. Jesse's extreme vigilance and anxiety were manifestations of the inevitable damage that occurred when people, however well-being, completely misunderstand the behavior of individuals with autism. How does this happen? The short answer is that caregivers neglect to ask why. They don't listen carefully or observe closely. Instead of seeking to understand the child's perspective and experience, they simply try to manage the behavior. Unfortunately, this behavioral assessment approach, that is using a checklist of deficits, has become the standard way of determining whether a person has autism. We say a child has autism if he displays a combination of traits and behaviors that are deemed to be problematic. Difficulty in communicating, trouble developing relationships, and restricted repertoire of interests and behaviors, including repetitive speech, known as echolalia, and actions such as rocking, arm flapping, and spinning. Professionals observe these autistic behaviors and then assess the people who display them by using a sort of circular reasoning. Why does Rachel flap her hands? Because she has autism. Why has she been diagnosed with autism? Because she flaps. Following this approach means defining a child as a sum of his deficits. How best to help such a child? By managing those behaviors or attempting to get rid of them, or halt the rocking, to squelch the echoing speech, to reduce the flapping. And what denotes success? The more we can make a child look and act, quote, normal, the better. That's not true. The way of understanding and supporting people with autism is sorely lacking. It treats the person as a problem to be solved rather than an individual to be understood. It fails to show respect for the individual and ignores the person's perspective and experience. It neglects the importance of listening, paying close attention to what the person is trying to tell us, whether through speech or patterns of behavior. On top of that, in my experience, it doesn't work and often makes things worse. What's more helpful is to dig deeper, to ask what is motivating these behaviors, what is underlying these patterns. It's more appropriate and more effective to ask why. Why is she rocking? Why does she line up the toy cars that way? And why only when he arrives from school? Why does he stare at his hands fluttering in front of his eyes? And always during English class and recess? Why does she repeat certain phrases when she is upset? Okay, page 18. The challenge of dysregulation. Usually the answer is that the person is experiencing some degree of emotional dysregulation. When we are well regulated emotionally, we are most available for learning and engaging with others. We all strive to be alert, focused, and prepared to participate in activities in our daily lives. Our neurological systems held by filtering out excessive stimulation, telling us when we're hungry or tired or when to protect ourselves from danger. People with autism, primarily due to underlying neurology, the way our brain wiring works, are unusually vulnerable to everyday emotional and physiological changes. So they experience more feelings of discomfort, more feelings of anxiety and confusion than others. They also have more difficulty learning how to cope with these feelings and challenges. To be clear, difficulty staying well regulated emotionally and physiologically should be a core defining feature of autism. Unfortunately, professionals have long overlooked this, focusing on the resulting behaviors instead of the underlying causes. If you know a person with autism, consider what makes that person less able to stay well regulated. Problems in communicating, environments that are chaotic, people who are confusing because they talk or move too quickly, unexpected change, excessive worry about things that are uncertain. Then there are associated challenges such as sensory sensitivities to touch and sound, motor and movement disturbances, sleep deprivation, allergies, and gastrointestinal issues. Of course, people with autism aren't alone in experiencing these challenges. We all feel dysregulated from time to time, and I want to pause and just say the dysregulation of emotions, I think, is what we all are feeling right now. So maybe this will help us to really understand to a greater degree what people with autism go through on a daily basis. So just think about that. I feel like I give you so much to think about. I'm sorry. Speaking in front of a large audience, you might feel sweat collecting on your brow. Your hands might quiver. Your heart might race. Wearing a scratchy wool sweater might be so irritating that you can't focus. When your normal morning routine, coffee, newspaper, shower, is thrown off, or not going to school, is thrown off by an unexpected intrusion, you might feel out of sorts for the rest of the morning. When these factors accumulate, you miss sleep, you're under a deadline, you skip lunch, and then your computer crashes. It's easy to become extremely agitated. Just today I was extremely agitated. I know that feeling all too well. We all have these challenges, but people with autism are unusually ill-equipped to deal with them because of their neurology. That makes them far more vulnerable than others. That is, their threshold is much lower, and they have fewer innate coping strategies. In many cases, they also have sensory processing differences. They are either highly sensitive or undersensitive to sound, light, touch, and other sensations therefore less able to manage. In addition, many people with autism are innately unaware of how others might interpret their actions when they are dysregulated. Feeling emotionally dysregulated affects different people in different ways. Often the reactions are immediate and impulsive. A child's behavior may shift suddenly with no apparent cause. When a child is exposed to a loud noise, for instance, he might drop to the floor. I often see children refuse to enter a gym class or a school cafeteria. Their teachers might mistakenly believe that this is willful disobedience, a planned attempt to escape an activity the child doesn't enjoy. The reason is typically much deeper than that. The child can't bear the volume or quality of the noise or chaos in the setting. When I worked in preschool autism program based in a hospital, the children ate lunch in the classroom on trays brought up from the hospital cafeteria. Once a teacher and I led the 4- and 5-year-olds to the cafeteria kitchen so they could see how the trays were cleaned. At exactly the moment we arrived, the instructional The industrial-sized dishwasher spewed forth steam and suddenly emitted a high-frequency shh. Instantly, all children dropped their trays. Some covered their ears and screamed, and they ran for the exit. It was as if a monster had suddenly appeared inches from their face. That's dysregulation, sudden and visible. Sometimes the cause of dysregulation is less obvious. While visiting a preschool where I consulted, I was walking outdoors with Dylan, a 4-year-old with autism, when suddenly, without any warning, he dropped to the ground and refused to proceed. I gently picked him up and helped him along, but soon he dropped again. As I held him again, we heard a dog barking. He immediately panicked and tried to run away from the sound. It dawned on me that Dylan, with his hypersensitive hearing, had heard the dog all along, but its bark had been so distant and it hadn't registered with me. What might have appeared as uncooperative, random, or defiant behavior was in fact a very understandable expression of fear. That too is dysregulation. Many children with autism flap their arms, either as an expression of their level of excitement or to calm themselves. When Connor felt joyful, and sometimes when he was anxious about a transition between activities, he did what his parents called his happy dance. He stood on his toes and stepped forward, then back, while flicking his fingers in front of his eyes. An earlier therapist advised Connor's parents to respond with firm hands down. And if he didn't comply, sit down, hands down, sit on your hands. To their credit, his parents ignored the suggestion, instead helping Connor to label his feelings or easing transitions by telling him what to expect. It's easy to dismiss flapping or rocking or dancing as just so much autistic behavior. But parents raising children with autism and the professionals who work with them need to take an extra step. Like detectives, we need to examine and consider all available clues and work to discern what is underlying or triggering a particular reaction. What is making the child dysregulated? Is it internal or external? Is it visible? Is it in the sensory realm? Is it pain or physical discomfort or traumatic memory? In most cases, the child can't explain the behavior in words, so it's up to those close to him or her to sort through those clues. Okay, we will stop there. For anyone joining along, we stopped on page 20 in chapter 1. So I'm very proud of us. We got through the introduction, so make sure to catch up on episodes 1 through 3 if today is your first day joining us. And then tomorrow we're going to have a special guest who's going to read to us. And anything else on this channel that you might find helpful for your families or for your own remote learning at home, just feel free to just kind of explore through. But thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you're well, and just be good to yourself. Give yourself grace and give others grace around you.